like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search.
Hello everyone and welcome back in the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. I was about to say Fantasy Sports. I completely forgot which show I was on. But coming up for our third segment here, we're going to be taking a deep dive look into our CFP finalists, specifically our champions first and foremost, Ohio State Buckeyes, and look at what could potentially be next and how they could get back to the mountaintop yet again next season. And for Ohio State, I think the task is going to be a lot tougher than people think. They lose a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, but specifically on that defense, really need to find solutions, whether it be in the transfer portal or signing a couple more recruits to completely shore up this squad and ensure that it maintains the contender status in a very loaded Big Ten for next season. So without further ado, let us jump right into what's next for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So obviously, let's talk about some of the departing players from this championship squad. Obviously, you lose Will Howard and Emeka Egbuka on the offensive side of the football. Emeka Egbuka, very underrated throughout his entire Ohio State career. Never got the high-profile attention like guys like Marvin Harrison and Jackson Smith-Njigba got before him, and certainly not with Jeremiah Smith, the true freshman in town. Even a little bit of Carnell Tate as well. But Emeka Egbuka, throughout his career, constantly proved that he was a silent killer. He's someone I really like coming out in this draft. Savvy route runner. Not necessarily going to beat you vertically, but still someone a lot of NFL teams would love to have. And then obviously Will Howard transferring over from Kansas State to get a better opportunity and better shot at a national championship. And now seeing as to how this quarterback class potentially isn't going to be as good as a lot of people thought it was, could find himself sitting somewhere in the mid round 3, early round 4 conversation, even though in previous years he may have gone undrafted entirely. But now, let's talk about this defense, because that's where most of the concern lies in terms of the production that is leaving. You have about 6 or 7 starters who gave you high-end production throughout the entirety of their Ohio State careers, leaving for the NFL. At the edge positions, JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. My former prep brother, Cody Simon. At the linebacker position, Denzel Burke. At the cornerback position, Nathan Ransom at safety. So, a lot of solid production who made big plays, crucial in fact, to your success in the college football playoff. Without Cody Simon elevating his play, without Jack Sawyer's strip sack fumble, without, Lathan Ransom's late stops on 4th downs in the red zone in both games, without Denzel Burke's ball instincts, without JT Tuimoloau's high motor, chances are Ohio State might not run the table in the CFP this year. Because of that veteran leadership, all of these guys returning for this opportunity, that's the reason they got to the precipice, and now that's the reason they got to the pinnacle. And that's the reason why losing them could prove to be a detriment to the transformation of this defense. But I do think that 2025 still offers a lot of opportunities for several new leaders to be found. Caleb Downs still remains for this defense. And in terms of your recruitment prowess, in terms of how you have scored the transfer portal, you should not be upset if you're an Ohio State Buckeyes fan in terms of being able to find new production, because you very well might be able to, and you already have done so. But let's talk about what 2025 now will look like for Ohio State. Obviously, the Will Howard era has ended, even though it was only 1 year, and the Julian Sayin era begins. Devin Brown ultimately could have been the starting quarterback, but because of the fact that Julian Sayin was already there for 5-star recruit, and they also brought in Tavian St. Clair in this year's signing period, Kevin Brown leaves and signs with Cal. We wish him the best of luck if you're not an Ohio State fan potentially, and you're a Cal fan, I think he could have a very good career there. But now it's all about Julian Sayin. And I think that I'm really excited, more so than any other quarterback outside of maybe Arch Manning, making their first ever starting appearances for their squad, than Julian Sayin. I think this guy's very talented, has a great arm, great accuracy, great talent, and clearly looking like someone who Ohio State believes to lead them into a new period. In terms of the recruitment props, we talked about Tavian St. Clair, maybe going to pull an Arch Manning, sit potentially 2 years behind Sayin before taking over the job. We'll see how that works out. But then at the corner position, to potentially fill the shoes of Denzel Burke, they signed 5-star corner Dennis Sanchez. Looking forward to seeing him on the field. Actually, Devin Sanchez, sorry about that name mix-up. But the biggest recruitment error, not necessarily error, but the biggest recruitment miss is the fact that they lost Naeem Offord, a promising, I believe, offensive tackle. Don't quote me on that because I didn't necessarily write his position down, unfortunately, to their rival Oregon. And that flip could hurt them, but I'm not necessarily too concerned. I think that they've done a fantastic job, even with all the offensive line talent building that offensive lineup. There may be some questions about it, but if Julian Sayin, much like Arch Manning might have to do with Texas, can answer those questions because of his abilities, then you don't necessarily have to ask the questions about that offensive line. But certainly the only recruiting mishap that befell Ohio State in this cycle, but they've gotten players needed to bolster important needs that have been left behind by these talented players leaving for the draft. But in terms of this offensive line, which is losing a lot of productions, Donovan Jackson, Josh Simmons, who emerged, they added Rice transfer Ethan Onianwa and Minnesota tackle Philip Daniels. So clearly Ryan Day being proactive in certain areas to further supplement this roster. It's not like, they don't know the shoes they have to fill. But I do feel like that by addressing it, he's making clear the fact that he wants this offensive line to stop being a problem. Because that was perhaps the only problems Ohio State faced all year, was on the offensive line. And then it looks sterling in the CFP. So clearly Ryan Day wants to uphold that standard in 2025 for Julian Sayin, who's starting in his first ever year for Ohio State. And then in terms of important additions on the offensive side of the football through the transfer portal as well, you obviously lose Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in the backfield as well. Two guys who were probably the best running back tandem in all of college football this season when all was said and done. And now they go off in search of NFL homes. And then at the tight end position, not necessarily known for tight end talent are Ohio State, but clearly a position that they really want to bolster. Obviously, G. Scott had a pretty decent, solid CFP, but ultimately they want to find other players to supplement that spot. So they added Max Clear of Purdue at the tight end position, potentially going to be a little bit more of an inline guy, receiving threat over G. Scott. And then in the backfield, C.J. Donaldson Jr., one of the more underrated running backs in the transfer cycle out of West Virginia for their offense. And ultimately going to show that they might want to continue bolstering positions that clearly have never been high profile at Ohio State. The tight end position and now the running back position, they're clearly cementing a roster that they feel will make Julian Sayin comfortable. Because that's what this is all about. You don't have the luxury of having a stellar offensive line anymore that can protect your first-year starter. You lose a lot of that production. Then the defensive side of the football, you lose a lot of production. But ultimately, by looking at what was successful in this 2024 team and what might not have been, you're clearly bolstering your squad to prepare for that first start against Texas. for Julian Sayin. When I look at all the ways they addressed needs for the portal, it's clear they want to hone in this offense. Because, yes, it's going to be worrisome if this defense can step up. They still have some good players. They still have, like I said, Caleb Downs, who's clearly going to be one of the vocal leaders of this, not just the secondary, but this entire defensive unit. But ultimately, when I think about this Ohio State offense and how I think they should build for 2025, I would agree with the sentiment that is through their offense. And so, by diagnosing solid players in both the offensive line with Onyanwa Daniels and at skilled positions like Max Clare and C.J. Donaldson Jr., they're maximizing the potential for this young quarterback. I feel like in terms of ways to address outside of offense, I think you need to build through your linebackers. I feel like at some point you're going to have to diagnose a leader like Cody Simon, like a Jack Sawyer, and it might have to come through the portal, it might have to come through recruiting, but that's what you need on that side of the football, because Caleb Downs is a do-everything safety in his own right, and I really love him, and he's an elite player, but he can't do it on his own. So you need to find a guy, whether it be, like I said, recruiting or transfer portal, who can sit at the center of that defense and be the ultimate communicator for this group. But in terms of how Ohio State's building, it's clear that they want to build an offensive juggernaut because their schedule is not going to be easy. They get Texas at home, yes, the first game of the season. That might be enough in a raucous environment for Julian Sayin to get over the hump against Arch Manning. But then you go against tough opponents like Michigan and Illinois on the road, and you haven't beaten Michigan in 4 attempts under Ryan Day. And you get Oregon at home as well, but remember last year in the regular season. So in order for this team to get back to where they were, in order for this team to even contend to be champions, they're going to have to figure out how to make Julian Sayin comfortable, figure out who's going to be the leader on this defense, and ultimately weather the storm of a much tougher schedule come 2025. But I'm really excited to see what the future holds for this Ohio State Buckeyes teams, because they're coming into the season with confidence, with motivation after a national championship win, that they truly can do this thing again, run it back, even with newer faces. But let me know what you think if you're an Ohio State Buckeyes fan. Let me know what you think if you're a college football fan, because this Ohio State team is going to be one of the most heavily scrutinized teams next season. But coming next, we look at the loser of the CFP Championship, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and what they need to do to retool and rebuild for another season in college football. They're right back after this short break.